Today, I thought we would talk about the evolution of the entrepreneur. And this came about because people who get into the entrepreneurial sphere find themselves in a never ending cycle of personal development. And you can look at that as grounded as you wish or as spiritual as you wish, but either way, they find themselves in a perpetual state of personal development, which I think is one of the great beauties of entrepreneurship.
They kind of have to, right? New level, new devil. And as we tackle a thing, we see like, oh, there's still more to learn. Oh, there's still more to know. Oh, there's still more I can do. You're never done.
And this conversation was actually spurred because we had a conversation in the mastermind with the accelerators. And in that conversation, it became really evident that some people get to a level within their business where they're like, I don't know that this business fits anymore. Right. And that happened to you. It has certainly happened to me. And I think we do this in the corporate world, but it's not as obvious as when you're doing it for yourself. And what happens is like you create a thing and you get comfortable in that thing and it's feeding you, it's working. But what else? What is next? And then we start asking ourselves the deeper questions like, what impact am I creating? Why am I here? What's my purpose? What am I supposed to be doing? And that's what we saw a lot of last week. So that's what actually spurred this conversation.
Yeah. One of the things that I've noticed is that when you build a business from your current seat of understanding, when you do the work of personal development and business development, you grow. The business sometimes becomes a prison because it was created with a knowledge set that you no longer embrace. And now this can look a few different ways. I was joking around with you yesterday about being business death doulas. And you've been a business death doula for a long time because you've talked a lot of people into either selling or shutting down businesses, not because you're like, you should sell, you should cut it down, but because you just do the work of like recognizing that that's the thing that the person wants to do most, but they're terrified to do it because they're telling themselves all sorts of stories about what it means about them if they have this successful thing and then they exit this successful thing. Or they have these fears like, well, if I've already done it once, what if I can't do it again? It's paying me. What am I going to do without that income? It's too much of a risk, right? There's lots of stories that you work through when someone's like, this no longer fits. This business no longer fits the me that I am. So in a lot of ways, when a business gets to that point, and the symptoms of this are like overwhelm, frustration with the business. Like I knew that's when I had gotten that way with my first business, was that like anytime I'd get like a lead or I'd have to execute on a contract, I was almost like resentful and like frustrated. It was like a distraction. It felt like such an annoyance. So there's a lot of different ways this shows up. We get a lot of burnout, the overwhelm, we get the lack of excitement to grow. Like you just kind of put it on autopilot and you do the things that you need to do. You kind of dread doing the work. You avoid getting new clients. Your marketing messaging sounds very like checkboxy and like you're walking through the motions, right? There's all sorts of symptoms to when people experience this in their business. And there's one solution, and it is death. But it could be a big death or a little death. And the big death, obviously, is exiting the obligation, right? Because a business is an entity that's been cast outside yourself. And you can choose to cut the ties and like let the business continue to run, or you can do what I like to do in the current business, and I've done it a number of times, is you burn it down in some way, shape, or form. And so that could look like I no longer offer these products because they take up too much of my energy. I don't get any joy out of doing them. I'm not really aligned with the deliverables over here anymore. I'm a content-based educator. So like I've removed entire programs. I don't teach them anymore. I don't offer this service, that sort of thing. So like small deaths can kind of look like giving people permission to not keep doing a thing that they've been doing, even if they are obligated. This is another thing. We get, well, I have contracts, cancel them. Just stop doing them. Just have a conversation with the client. I know that this is a 12-month contract, or we do this every year. We're not doing this anymore. And like, sure, there might be fallout, like, but you have to be willing to deal with whatever that fallout looks like. That's the little death. And obviously the big death is getting out from under it altogether.
Yeah, there's a comfort that people establish that keeps them from even practicing the small deaths, much less the big death. And actually, like, this happens in relationships too. Like, the number of times I see couples who just they're not in love anymore. And a lot of times we think that means you mentioned this, it means something about me. It doesn't. Like, people grow, and who you are today is not who you're going to be tomorrow if you're doing it effectively. It's certainly not going to be who you are in 5, 10, 15 years. And so the shoe should not continuously just fit, no matter what shoe it is, relationships, business, otherwise, right? And that's the process of evolution. And so the game of entrepreneurialism is to stay soul aligned. And that's where we see people drop off because it's scary. Like, the soul calls you to go against the grain. The soul's never going to be like, "Hey, why don't you just follow the crowd and like play by the rules?" You know what I mean? Like, it's never going to do that. And so when you come to this space where either you're feeling like dread for what you have, or even if you have to muster up excitement, you know what I mean? If you have to like constantly seek some sort of micro breakthrough so you can be like, "Oh, I'm turned on by my business again." And like you have to do that forcefully. At that point, it's because you're being called to something else, something deeper, something more profound, something more aligned. And it does call you to take radical responsibility. And so, to your point, you got to stop doing the things. And that may mean that there are repercussions that you have to then, like, you just assume the consequences for it. Like, whatever you're gonna do, just decide, "I have my own fucking back." And that's the part that most people don't have, right? They're like, "Oh, no, well, what if this happened or this happened?" So what? Are you still gonna love you? And most of the time, the answer is no. Most of the time, they haven't established a baseline of self-love, self-trust, and self-worth that they could carry no matter where their path led them, right? And so at that point, they go, "No, I would self-abandon," and they decide to stay in comfort instead.
Mic drop moment, right? Yeah. So business owners that we work with are experiencing discomfort period. And that's a good thing. People aren't really drawn to work with us if they're like, "I'm totally comfortable. I like the way it is, and everything is just glorious." Cool. People who work with us are at a pivot point almost always. Either they're launching, that's a huge time suck, energy suck. You have to know a lot, do a lot to get something from stop to start. And so it's an arduous process, always best done with mentors for a number of different reasons. The other time that we have people work with us is when they're like, "I just don't know what I'm doing wrong to be working so hard and not reaping the rewards from all the work that they have been putting into their business." And sometimes when we get the people at that stage, the reason they're not reaping the rewards is because they're stuck between, "This doesn't fit anymore. I don't have clarity, or I don't have willingness to make the change that's required of me." And the clarity we can help with. The willingness is where we end up butting heads with people. They get triggered. They say, "Well, I can't because," like, there's lots of excuses as to why that's not a possibility. And we can certainly attempt to work through those, but you really need the willingness piece in order to break out of the rut and the mold and the discomfort that has been created from your business prison.
Will lives in the gut. Will is the fires. It's the stuff of the warrior. The warrior takes immense responsibility in opposition to its shadow counterpart, the victim bully energy, which is like, everything's happening to me. That mindset is easy in like corporate America. You have no control in corporate America. Everybody's in control of your salary, your hours, your vacation days, your teammates, like everybody else is in control. And so when they come into entrepreneurialism, there's this tendency for victim mindset. But also potentially they've been in entrepreneurial venture and they've done that with victim mentality and they're not seeing the success that they truly want. And they're saying like, "Oh, I'm at the mercy of the algorithm." I can't tell you how many times people are like, "Oh, the algorithm," which like we don't even teach social media as a solid fucking strategy anymore. I actually saw an article on my like little Google front page feed that was talking about AI. And the prediction is that the more automation and the more artificial intelligence that is birthed into the world, the more people are going to start seeking actual human connection again. And that's going to become the edge in all marketing. People are starving for like a real connection. And I see that in my personal business. People come to me, they're like, I just want somebody to like have a soul deep conversation with and somebody to listen to me, to really hear what I'm saying and reflect back to me with honest eyes. People crave that. And so I think marketing is going to morph and we're going to see more and more people who are tired of the internet. They really want human connection. They want to feel something. And we see that in the entrepreneurial game. It's happening now. Even the business owners who are out there marketing are like, I want something deeper. I want something more. What is that next thing for me?
Marketing has always been about intimacy, always. It has always been about intimacy and connection and reflecting back to people parts of themselves that they either love, and that makes you love that company because you're reflecting back something that you really like. Disney's a great example of that. People love Disney because it's like magic. You make me feel a certain way, right? Or hate. And so if you're triggered by something that the company has taken a stance on, you can then build a connection about a thing that both of you dislike. Or if you see something, I'll say like plastic surgery. If they're reflecting before and afters, and I'm like, man, I also hate my crow's feet. I would love plastic surgery to fix those, right? So it's reflecting back to me something that I hate about myself. And therefore that marketing works. So marketing has always been about building intimacy. The problem with AI in the space right now is that if you know anything about marketing, it's the know, like, and trust. The trust piece is being eroded through standard marketing channels because now nobody knows what is real. And so because nobody knows what is real, they aren't able to build trust via that social media vessel. And so that's where we find a lack of intimacy being created in social media.
People are starting to catch on and they're getting tired of it, I think. That's not what today's podcast is about. And that's not what I wanted to. So I'm going to say what I wanted to say about the plateau. I think the plateau is a really great indicator for entrepreneurs that something else is required. Now, it could be that something more in your business is required, but sometimes it's that this thing no longer holds passion for you. You're not hungry for it anymore. You're just kind of going through the motions. And so while it's still feeding you, there's a lack of fulfillment. And this is where we see you can embrace entrepreneurialism as an evolution. And when you do that, you recognize that day to day, you're going to be growing and changing and morphing and transforming. And so will your business. And so the business that you have today is not going to look like it did last year. It might not even look like it did 3 weeks ago. And so, yeah, you want to build systems of consistency around a thing that works and a thing that you love, though. If you're unaligned, you're going to see that plateau happen. And what's going to be required is that you continuously have to put forth what we call super efforts to drag something across the finish line. So maybe that means that you have to work, 12-hour days to like change and rearrange your whole website. Maybe it looks like running a massive sale on something. Maybe it means just overhauling your entire program section. And sometimes, like, if you're in it, that works and you'll see an increase in sales. But then you'll go back to the baseline. And if you keep returning to baseline, I think that's an indicator that there's something else for you. When what you've done stops working, like what you've always done that has always worked stops working, now it's time to start doing new things.
Right, right. What got you here won't get you there. The plateau of the fact that like you've been doing a thing and now you're getting consistent results. And if that consistency is no longer, to your point, fulfilling and getting you to the goals that you want to do or to the level of whatever it is that you're trying to achieve, then you have to do new things. And some of those new things are probably going to take you backwards, but you won't know until you try. And some of those things are going to bring you forward. And the important thing is to build the awareness around symptoms in you or in your business, what they look like, what they can mean, what you need to break out of it, right? And that can look like any number of things. Maybe you need clarity as to like, what can I do to get from here to there? Maybe you need permission. Like I kind of already know what I need to do, but I'm terrified to do it. And so I just need someone to like hold space for me as I work through this really challenging thing. Maybe what you need is a redirection. I've had a number of conversations with business owners that are like dreading a thing, hating a thing, whatever. And then I'll have a conversation that's just a reframe. And they're like, oh my gosh, looking at it from that angle, it's actually, I'm a little bit more excited about that. There's any number of things that could be available when you get to a place where you're like stuck or plateaued or just feeling like it doesn't fit anymore. Sometimes it is just burning it down.
The tarot is so silly. Tarot is so silly. I pulled the Nine of Cups, which is the card of fulfillment. And it actually, I didn't know this, lives in the soul or the solar plexus, the belly, the gut, which we started this podcast by saying that will is in the seat of the soul. It's in the seat of the solar plexus. And I have no idea what this has to do with anything. I'm going to riff on it because I think it might be relevant. But I was reading in the Occult Anatomy of Man before we hopped on, and he talked about heaven, Midgard, and hell. Heaven being the mind, the upper body, the shoulders, head, neck, throat, thought. This is where like the gurus live and hang out. Midgard then being, I would assume, the heart area. Midgard is the space where the gods and the demons are always fighting it out. There's always turmoil in the heart, right? People are like, I don't know, follow your heart. Well, my heart's tugging in both directions, right? And then hell would be, and a lot of people might say it's the root, but actually I would chalk it up to the gut because the gut gives big hell vibes. Like you think about like hell as it's been described to us, like fiery pit. Well, that sounds like stomach acid to me, you know what I mean? And when we think about like creating fulfillment and creating and mustering up willpower, because willpower is created. It's not something that like people wait for will. That's a victim mentality. Willpower is created. The warrior gets up and does what he has to do regardless. And so I think this conversation could be twofold in that, like, sure, as an enlightened master, you walk the world and you're completely fulfilled in everything you do, right? Before enlightenment, sweep the floor, wash the dishes. After enlightenment, sweep the floor, wash the dishes. But now you do it with awareness, with presence, with fulfillment. And so, what do you think is like the telltale sign? Like, how do I know that I'm not just being an over consuming human by wanting more versus I'm just not being grateful for what's in front of me?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think the answer might be different for everyone. I've personally been through this in the fact that is the call coming from inside the house, right? Is the desire for more revenue, for example, because someone out there said you should be making seven figures. And so you're like, well, that's the new marker for success. And so I need to get there if I'm going to feel like a successful entrepreneur. If that's what's driving your business tactics, your business strategy, because someone outside of yourself is like, this is the marker for success. And you're like, sounds good to me. I wasn't really quite sure where I was going anyways. So I might as well just choose that and move in that direction. Then I think that those hollow goals, to a certain extent in the business world, Simon Sinek memorialized this as like, start with why, right? So if you don't have a why and you're just doing a thing, you're going to have a hard time with it. And so if you built a business because you're like, I want to make 6, 7 figures, and you read every bro book out there about how to get to 7 figures, and it included invest in real estate and buy businesses and sell them, like all of these things, right? And that's not something that actually like makes you happy. You're not really excited to do it, but you're like, that's the pathway to wealth. At some point, you're going to build a business based on somebody else's framework, and it's going to not fit very well. You're not either going to know what to do next because you've exhausted every, resource out there that's like, this is the checklist, this is the swipe file, this is the template. Just go and put this into your business, plug it right in, and away you go. You're going to exhaust all of that, and you're going to be like, okay, well, now what? It wasn't ever your idea to begin with. None of it was yours, right? And so that, I think, is perilous. I really want to connect with what I see as the most frequent avenue of entrepreneurship. And that is somebody either makes a thing or is willing to sell their labor to do a thing. And they're like, I can make money doing this. And so you could walk dogs, you could do hair, you could sell a product. Maybe you make candles, maybe you sell things on Etsy, you make jewelry, or you are a makeup artist. Or in our case, we work with people who are starting mobile bars, right? Which is a lot of physical labor. And it is doing a thing for someone that they either don't want to do themselves or they don't know how to do themselves. And so Level one, we get people who want to either sell a thing or sell their labor. When they build a certain modicum of success doing that, and that is oftentimes all that our people have known. We get a lot of people that come from teaching or nursing, and those people have literally always sold their services. They've sold their time, their hands, their compassion, their joy for a certain thing, and they've made money up until that point doing that. And so then they get into a business where they're doing the same thing, tangible manual labor for someone. Eventually, if they reach a certain level of success within that business, they top out with how many hours they have to give, with how many fucks they have to give, with how much capacity that they have mentally, physically, etc. Right? They just cap out. And a lot of times that's where we see burnout. That's where we see people starting to dysregulate their nervous systems. They lose sleep. They develop anxiety, potentially even depression. We see all of those things. Usually at this point, they're still not paying themselves enough to make all of it worth it. The next level in evolution for these business owners, and I think you saw a diagram once that I thought put this very well, is we stop using our hands to make money and we start using our minds to make money. And this is where we usually start working with people on leadership skills. This is usually the first time people are willing to have an actual mindset conversation with us, because before that, it's all mindset is just a distraction to them selling this product or using their manual labor to do a thing. So when they start to top out here, that's when they're like, maybe I do need to trust people and hire them on my team, but I have trust issues. Can we look at that? Maybe I do need to recognize that I'm holding myself back because I have imposter syndrome and I don't feel like I'm good enough to tell other people what to do. And are you willing to help me look at that? Right? That's when we get to have these mindset conversations. That's when everything changes for an entrepreneur. The minute they're willing to embrace mindset conversations and embrace the fact that their physical labor or the product that they are selling was never the game in entrepreneurship. That was literally the vessel by which you were doing your great work in the world. That's where we can really start to make change. That's where we first start to see people with a discomfort of, I don't know where to go. I don't know what to do. This doesn't fit. I have this business that's making money. I can't do this forever.
Man, I love our podcasts. Here and on Mobile Bev Bros, like, the fuck, yes, you know? Yes. We also see entrepreneurs go wide at this stage. When it's time for them to go deep, when they have that call to go deep, which is a symbol, right? I want to be clear that like your entrepreneurial venture, your business is a symbol, as are all things in your world, your relationships, your body, your health, for what's going on inside. And so oftentimes they'll be called deep, and this happens in trauma work. We tap on a thing and they're being called to go deep on that particular wound. And they're like, oh, wait, let me go wide. Let's also talk about my uncle. And they'll pull you way out over here. And so they'll just spin up a whole new business that still requires the physical labor piece, right? The product or physical labor, which is, we started talking about hell, Midgard, and heaven. And it seems like in hell, you're in physical labor, constant, continuous physical labor. And it's a locked box. The matrix is finite because you only have so many hours in a day and you can only lift and lug so many things. You can only provide so much customer service in a day because you're bound by time. When you elevate to that next level where you're using your mind and your mouth, right? We're using the mind and the communication skills, which like hello leadership, hello delegation, right? Hello trust issues. At that level, you're now ascending. You're literally, this is a process of ascension, not just in your business, but in your consciousness. And so it calls you to things that might be uncomfortable. Now I have to work on my communication skills. I've never led a team. I've never taught a thing, right? Whatever it is. And so a lot of people will get to the edge and they'll say, okay, I can stop using my physical labor. And they'll go, ooh, that's scary because then I have to learn an immense amount of new skills, right? And they got to do a lot of shadow work, if you will, a lot of alchemy, a lot of transformation.
These are all little deaths. These are
Small deaths.
right. Death duel, business death dueling here. These are all little deaths. The old versions of you need to die in order to make way for these new versions of you. The you that was the manual labor within your business, she gone. Now we need CEO you that is leading a team, that is hiring a team, that is trusting in a team, that is communicating their needs and expectations and holding people accountable. I want to be clear that if you're at level 1 right now in your business or as an employee somewhere else, you know you're at level 1 because you are hourly, you're either charging hourly or you're being paid for your time to be somewhere, or you are selling per piece. You're having to package up something and shipping, like that all takes time and all of that. If you're making the vast majority of your money off of a product per piece or hourly blocks, you're at level 1.
And hourly blocks doesn't just look like someone pays you $20 an hour or $100 an hour or whatever. Hourly blocks can look like I'm a slave to this thing and it requires 35 hours a week of me. Even if it's your business. What do you always say? You bought yourself a job, right?
Yeah,
Like you just
absolutely. So many people, because that's the framework that they come from. It's what they know. They just then go and build themselves something that looks exactly like the thing that they were doing over here, except for now they're the boss. They're the boss. They had a boss. Now they're the boss of themselves. But who wants a boss? Period, right? Nobody wants a boss.
right, and they don't have leadership skills, so they're not very good at leading themselves, right? And so so now you have a shitty boss and it's
Right.
you.
And so when you're
Um,
leading yourself, that's called discipline. And
yeah.
everyone
Oh,
hates that word. That's a whole
this
episode in and of itself.
yep, yep, disciple in, right? The piece that I asked you earlier, and you said I would ask if it's coming from within the house. This is exactly how I guide any client that comes into the container with me is that I'm always going to push them back into themselves. Well, my mom says, I don't care what your mom says. Do you think what your mom says is true about you? Okay, then let's do that work because mom's allowed to say whatever she wants to say. Hubby's allowed to think what he thinks. Do you identify with it? And that's where we see people stuck is they identify with the external. And so they think how other people perceive them is a locked box. It's who they are. They identify with the overarching societal norms or what their familial unit has imposed upon them or what their last boss said or what their teacher said when they were 6. Like they have all these external identifications that aren't truly who they are. And that's why historically I've been a death doula of businesses and relationships and why a lot of people I think come to containers with me and they touch it and they go, "Oh no, no." Some of them stay for a lifetime, but others they come in and they touch it and they go, "No, no, I'm not ready to leave behind everything I know that doesn't fit anymore." And they know when they meet with me, that's what I'm going to require. I'm going to require that they take action on the sacrifice that is required for their next level. You know what I mean? And I'm going to hold their feet to the fire. You use the example of 7 figures. So people, they hear that 7 figures is the climax of success and they have to get there. The problem that I've seen is that a lot of women that come to me, they're not aligned with their feminine. And so they can't relax and they can't see the forest for the trees. And what a lot of times is happening is that they already have access to all the things that they want, 7 figures to bring them. But they don't need 7 figures for those things. They're like, I want freedom of time. Okay, well, why do you work 36 hours a day? Well, because I have to. I got to get it done. I got to do the things. Well, but who's the boss here? So they think that 7 figures is going to buy them permission to live their life. And so they're constantly striving, leaving life behind in the dust so that they can make it to a fictitious goal, only to realize that fuck, your life is gone. You know what I mean? Like you were supposed to live it when it was here. You're supposed to live it right now. And so if 7 figures was handed to you and you identified with it and you think it's going to buy you X, Y, and Z, start looking at your life and recognize that you probably already have X, Y, and Z. Here's where worthiness comes in. You may not be allowing yourself to enjoy it, to have it, or even to see it. You're not even allowing yourself to see how blessed you are because you think that there's something wrong with you because you haven't hit that external goal. Hello, burnout and depression.
The other thing that I'll mention here, because you mentioned the feminine, the ability to be vulnerable and to see what's right in front of you. If you're in the toxic one, you're in the toxic other, right? We've actually seen this happen many times when people win the lottery and they're given large amounts of money. And then they follow up with them a few years later and it's gone. And that's because they're not in their divine masculine, in the fact they cannot hold the responsibility of that. So you want seven figures, but you actually have no idea what to do with it when you get it. You want seven figures, but you can't get there because you're like a sieve, because you haven't taken responsibility for all the mini levels, all the levels in between that would enable you to actually hold and support seven figures once you get there. The number of entrepreneurs I've worked with that make multiple six figures and then look at their bank account and they say, I actually don't know where all my money's gone. I've made all of this money, but none of it's still there. That's a lack of ability to hold on to what you've got. So yeah, you could get to seven figures, but would you still have any of it left? Would there be any proof that you had seven figures? Because if you're making six figures right now, you're looking at the bottom line of your business going, where did it all go? Where is it? Where is it? It's not in my pocket. Then having seven is not going to improve that situation. I promise you.
I saw a TikTok once. This guy was like, he was like a billionaire, and somebody stopped him on the sidewalk with like their little interview thing. And they were like, hey man, like, what would you tell brand new entrepreneurs or like baby entrepreneurs? What advice would you give? And he said, you have the same problems in $100,000 business that you do in a multi-million-dollar business. They're the exact same struggles, issues. He said, work on your mindset first, because your mindset is how you get out of those loops so that when you hit those seven figures, you're not just looping through the same problems you had when you were at six figures, right? If you can blow through 100K in a year, you can blow through a mill in a year. The problem isn't how much money you make. The problem is that you, to your point, can't hold it. You haven't inspired the divine masculine to take that radical responsibility. You haven't inspired the divine masculine to provide and to protect your resources. I mean, there's so much we could go into on that, but I'll leave that for another episode. You have to work on the mindset first. And again, back to entrepreneurial evolution, your business is going to tell you what it needs, right? You say that all the time, Sarah. It's going to tell you what it needs. And sometimes what it needs isn't tangible. What it needs isn't necessarily a new software or a VA. It's leadership skills, it's communication skills, it's the ability to burn a thing down and move on. It's you embracing evolution. I just spoke recently with a gentleman who takes a lot of pride in having always been exactly this way. And he kept using that as a marker for success, which we were on a discovery call. So, like, I wasn't in the coaching, I didn't have my coaching hat on. But by golly, he signed with me. And so we're going to be having a conversation about how that is not a marker of success. It's a marker of stagnation. And that potentially the problems he's seeing in his life are a result of that stagnation, taking pride in having always been the same. There's no growth in that. That's death. If you're not growing, you're dying. There's no in between. Stagnation is death.
Two things there. And the first, I think, is that there's a difference between being stagnant and staying true to values. And so I think it's important when someone says, I just have always been that way, that what we look at is the root value there. Because if you know what the value is, you can continue to grow and change, but you can have like a true north that's like, I can grow and change with the recognition that like consistency may be a thing that is a value. Doesn't mean you have to stay the same. There are areas in your life that are important for you to be consistent in. Okay, great. Well, what are those areas that we want to be consistent in? Not necessarily the same, but consistent. So that was the first thing that I wanted to mention. And the second thing that I wanted to mention that you mentioned that I say all the time, which is your business is going to tell you what it needs. The challenge that we see is that people don't know what it's saying. They hear it, they feel it, they recognize it's saying something. They don't know what it's saying. And so that's where we oftentimes see people that think it's saying one thing or want it to be saying one thing. And so they'll pursue those avenues wherein, okay, maybe your business is saying you need to slow down, or maybe your business is saying you need systems, and you feel that friction in your business and you're like, we're just not making enough money. We're not making enough money for this. And so we're going to push the pedal to the metal and we're going to grow. Well, if you grow your business without proper systems, what happens? Starts to crumble, right? Things start falling apart. Little problems become big problems. And that particular scenario starts with, well, we had these pain points and we knew that more money would solve these pain points. And so we decided to grow. but then it exacerbated the true root issue that the business was actually trying to communicate. And so your business is going to tell you that it needs something. And with proper insight, but also potentially if you don't know what it's saying, that's where mentors and coaches can come in, is because we can help reflect back to you. We can help you assess the situation so that you don't misinterpret the calls or the signals that your business is giving you.
Even the zodiac signs, like, you'll hear people that, like, "You're super stubborn." And they're like, "Oh, I'm a Taurus." You know what I mean? And they like, "Yeah, oh, yeah, it's a good thing to be stubborn." But actually, the zodiac signs, each of them have 3 phases. And then, of course, we're just talking about sun sign here. So for Aries, I'm an Aries, the ram. And the ram is like hard-headed, it's a fighter, it's fiery and like passionate, like uncontrolled passion, though. People always make the joke that you can find an Aries starting a fight, you know? And as I got older and as I continued to evolve, I was like, that doesn't really resonate with me anymore. And so I started doing some digging. Aries, we start with the ram, which is what I just described to you. And then we move to the shepherd. And the shepherd is like sort of hermetic in nature. It's like a guiding force, but it's also withdrawn. It will self isolate in order to heal or reflect so that it can become the third and final stage of its process, which is the sun reborn. And the sun reborn is all about having inner confidence and inner knowing and using that time that it spent alone to grow, to evolve, to become something new, and to hold itself with a level of certainty. I'm not confrontational. I used to be. In my younger years, I was very confrontational. And I always just was like, I'm an Aries, you know? And that's just another example of getting stuck in a story, right? Like, I've associated a story with my sun sign and I've locked my box. I can't get out. And so you and I know that one of the very best things and most disorienting things to do to evolve, no matter where you're trying to evolve, is to look at what you believe to be true and to constantly be assessing, does that fit anymore? That could be anything. It could be the story that I'm an Aries and so I'm a fighter and I'm hard headed and fiery. At some point, that became a limitation. Okay, well, when it becomes a limitation, it's time to say, I no longer believe that. And you don't have to pick a new belief immediately. A lot of people, they're like, oh, well, what will I replace this story with? And I'll give you a tool here, unknowing. Just don't know for a while. Like, if you spend time in the space of wonder, of what if, what could be, that's a very valuable and useful space. We sent an email today about Brew, our Puerto Rico retreat for business owners. And in that email, I talked about space and the value of space. And I just touched on it briefly. But space is something we see a lot of entrepreneurs not giving themselves enough of. And therefore, they're stuck. And they're stuck, whether they're stuck at their computer for 10 hours a day, 3 hours a day, whatever it is, they're just stuck. And that's because they don't give themselves space to enjoy the muse of life, to receive creative inspiration, to shake off what doesn't fit anymore, to ponder the world, to read a book about a thing that they might not even be interested in, just to see, like, what keys does this have for me?
Space is one of my favorite things, but it was also one of the hardest things to allow myself to have because I came from the perspective of productivity is my value. And the more I do, the more confidence I can have in saying, like, whatever it is I wanted to say about myself. I've worked 60-hour weeks, therefore, I'm valuable. Whatever it is, the stories that I was telling myself. And so if you're listening to this and you're like, I can't even imagine, right? We had a client wherein we shared that we don't check our emails over the weekend. We don't. And she was like, What? Who does that?" Like, we do, right? Because that was like foreign to her in concept. And it used to be foreign in concept to me as well. But creating the space, if you're doing a thing and it no longer feels right and you just drop it, and then they're like, well, what do I fill it with? And the response could be like, well, potentially nothing for now, right? Like, every time we create space, something beautiful kind of fits in there, right? If you're willing to let something die in the space, you have capacity for new things. And those new things are almost always better aligned because you're giving it space to resonate where you are. Like, if I had an extra 10 hours in my week, likely I'm not going to fill it with something that Sarah of 5 years ago would have filled it with, because Sarah of 5 years ago isn't here any longer. She's not the one that's doing any of the creation. And so if you're doing a thing, and we do this every once in a while, we'll take a look at the things in business. Does this fit any longer? Do we want to keep doing this? And one of the things I think I'm really good at are these phoenix moments, which are little deaths, right? The phoenix rises from the ashes. And so many times in my own business, I'm like, I don't really like doing this anymore. I'm just going to stop. And I've had a lot of business owners ask me, well, how do you just stop doing that? You've told everybody that you're going to do that. And I just say, well, I tell them I'm no longer doing that. And like, if they have a problem with it, they can go elsewhere. You know what I mean? We have people in our academy's 5 years old. And the things that we did when we first started are not what we do any longer. But there was time when I stopped doing a thing. And I felt great about not doing the thing anymore. I felt really great about not, these were live Q&A calls. And I was sick of going on these live Q&A calls and having one person there. We had 300 members. And I'm like, why is only one person here? Or two people? I'm like, obviously nobody cares about these. So I'm just going to stop doing them. But then I missed them. And so about a year later, I brought them back, and now they're always full. There's tons of people in there, right? And so sometimes you say no and you stop doing a thing, and then the newer version of you does it again, but in a different way, and it's even better. And that's what I think the importance of space is, that you're giving the new version of you opportunity to create within that space without the obligation of having to do a thing old version of you said was important to them, because it may not be anymore. But you're not going to know what you're going to put in that space unless you give it room to breathe, is what we like to say.
The irony here is your evolution is divine in nature. Yesterday morning, you and I were on a riff about being both the creator and the created. And so being able to touch the void and realize that nothing fucking matters, and then being able to turn that around and go, everything matters. But now it doesn't matter from a reactive place. It matters from a stable awareness type of place, right? Like everything is me, everything is my creation. And so we talked about being able to look at anything you create and say, it is very good. The Shanti Cristo gives the example that you bake a cake and it comes out freaking awesome. And you're like, yeah, I did that. You bake a cake and it turns out terrible. Like it must have been the flour. So we're willing to take responsibility for our successes. But when it comes to a failure, we separate that from ourselves. We say, oh, that's not me. That's not mine. And so when that happens, there's a division of consciousness, and there's a divvying up of what we'll be responsible for. And instead, you have the option to say, oh, look, I burnt the cake. How fabulous. This is my creation. And it is very good. And you don't have to be delusional. You don't have to eat the cake and be like, it tastes good. No, it's burnt, clearly, right? We should go to the store and get a cake because I can't make one. You know what I mean? And so yesterday we were talking about being both the creator and the created, and being able to say, this is my creation. It is very good, no matter what it is. From the morning when we had that conversation to last night, I was going through like an old manuscript I had written in 2020, actually, was when it was dated. So I've evolved lifetimes since 2020. Have I, though? Because I went back and read my book, which is fire. This manuscript was absolute fire. And the quote, the creator and the created, and the quote, this is my creation, it is very good, were both found in the first 2 pages of that manuscript as a pathway to Christ consciousness. And so, like, yeah, you evolve, but you evolve in spirals. I mean, the spirals could be its own episode, you know? It could be its own episode.
The number of times we say that. I think what you're reflecting back to me is the understanding that we're layers, right? And as you know better, you do better, but you don't lose that part of you. And even if there's a part of you you don't like, and we've talked about this before, you don't reject it. You can't. It's still a part of you. And if you do reject it, now you've created division, right? And so you can love it and recognize that even your mistakes, those burnt cakes, the time you said a thing you shouldn't have said, the time you insulted someone that you didn't mean to insult, the time you did a thing that you looking back on was like a big mistake, that's all a part of you. And so when I talk about small deaths, or even if I'm talking about big deaths in your business or in your personal life, it's still a part of you. You just have chosen not to continue running that pattern or that business or that service, whatever that is. You're just choosing to let what you learned as a part of that experience be a part of the whole. but it's not an active, I'm like algorithm is what keeps coming to mind, but it's not an active action that you're going to continue to put time, energy, and resources into.
Yeah. And I think what brought that up for me was the office hours, right? Where like you outgrew that and you're like, this has no business in my life. And you took it out. And some people were sad. They were one of the two people that ever showed up. But they would show up and go, okay, why are we here? And you're like, to ask me questions. They'd be like, we don't have questions. Can you just talk? Right. And you're like, this doesn't fit anymore. Like,
Yeah.
this isn't working.
Where
And
they're
so,
like, I'm just here to listen. To what? Like
right.
this is an office
It's a
hour.
Q&A. Like, and so you shut that down. And then when divine inspiration hit, when the call came from within the house, when it was organic again, you brought it back. But this time it was plentiful, right? This time they're there, you're having deep, intimate conversations, you're directing business owners to do things that they never thought were possible. Now it's aligned for you. And that's not to say it'll be aligned in the next 6 months, who knows? But being genuine and following your own evolution, it doesn't mean that you can't revisit things you've done in the past, because you will inevitably revisit things you've done in the past. It just means that when you look at things from the past with new eyes, with real eyes, with fresh eyes, sometimes you see something you couldn't see before. Or sometimes the timing just wasn't right and now it is. And so we're not saying like when a small death occurs, that person is dead to you. You should shame yourself. I should have never been that person. We're actually saying the opposite. We want you to look at that person with love. They were doing the very best they could with what they had, with what they knew how. And now there's a new version of you that can embrace that person as a whole mechanism. Osho says that healing is wholeness. They come from the same root word, says he. I haven't done the etymology on that, but that's what he says. They have the same root word, healing and wholeness. And so denying any aspect of you, that's not what we're asking you to do in the evolution of the entrepreneur. We're asking you instead to embrace every aspect of you, every you that has ever been, and use that to inform your path forward, but never stop moving forward. Except for, I mean, be in the now, forwardly.
Well, first episode, we said paradox, you have to hold two conflicting things in your mind. So yes, be in the moment, but also grow, right? And we grow through honoring that things don't necessarily fit and then taking a look at that and saying, what about this doesn't fit any longer? What about this makes it clear that something needs to change, that I need to do a different thing or stop doing a certain thing so that I can create more space or something that's better aligned for what it is that I want to go and do going forward. And the offer that I think that we have for entrepreneurs here is that if you can use your business as an outlet for play, you will inherently be better about killing off things that are holding you back and feeding things that are going to push you forward or invite you to learn new things or to expand into new spaces. Play means there's no risk. Play means that you can just start doing a thing and then stop doing a thing and you owe nothing to anybody about it. You're playing with new products, they don't turn out, cut them. Google's a great example of this. How many times have you started using a Google product that then you'll get an email and they're like 30 days from now, this will no longer exist? Like all the time. They try new things all the time. And then if it's like, didn't do what we wanted to do, is no longer a part of what we want to do, they just stop. Even if you're paying them for it, they're like, no longer. And like everyone has the ability, if Google can do it, literally anybody can do it. Whatever doesn't fit, take it off, burn it down, kill it, throw it in the trash. You have that option. I think that's ultimately what we wanted to share with people about the evolution of the entrepreneur is that when you feel this friction, it's usually an invitation. It's a hunger for what's next and what's more, but you can't take it's unlike Zelda, right? Zelda, you can put everything in your pack. Doesn't matter what it is. You've got room for more, right? I think food is the only thing that they limit. Whereas other games, it's by weight. And you're like, you can only, have so many grams. And now you got to get rid of something if you want to take this. Life is more like that. You can't take all of your baggage with you. You only have so much time in a day. You only have so much emotional capacity. You only have so much ability. That's because you have to learn to let things go. Elsa style, let it go. Right. And so
Oh, that's the gospel.
when you're feeling that friction, what are you putting down? so that you can be lighter and move to that next level. And if you're at level one entrepreneurship and you're selling your time and you're selling your products and you're uncomfortable with that and it's not making you what you want, or you don't have the time freedom that you want, well, that's because you're selling your time, right? So what's next? Mind and mouth. Learn how to communicate, polish those leadership skills, figure out what that next level for your company is. And then the evolution after that, that gets even more fun.
Another awesome episode of the Crowns and Chaos podcast. And so we'll do it again. We have an endless number of topics, as you guys hear us reference a million times throughout the podcast, that we could cover. So we'll get you another one. But for now, thanks so much. And feel free to leave us a comment if any of this resonated. You can message us, I think, through Substack. You can also reach out to us individually on our social medias if you feel called. We'll see you guys on the next one.